Most operating systems aren't anonymous. Hell, most don't do the bare minimum of not tracking you.
I'm still gonna always recommend an Apple iDevice over like any Android device to most people in my life. It's just generally gonna be better for privacy and security for them, from what I've done and what I've researched.
Personally, I'm currently using stock Android. So I have stock Android and stock iOS. That's so that I can test apps for the new oil and my reviews and stuff on the same environment that I recommend to my readers. My readers, I don't dive into custom OSs at all. I do mention them. I say like, hey, these exist, but they're advanced. They fall way outside the scope of this website. Go check them out if you want more information. I'm not going to talk about them here. So I stick to the stock OSs so that I can like make my reviews accurate and check like, okay, how does this work here? How does this work there?
With that said, being on stock Android was really awesome as well. I really liked being on stock Android. I know we made that video that people were like, oh my god, so angry about because they couldn't watch a whole video and understand threat modeling well enough to understand like why I was using stock Android for a brief time. It's funny because I was only on stock Android for like a few weeks before I think lockdown was released. And then I'm like, oh, perfect. This actually resolves like my core issue with like iPhones. And so I've been on an iPhone the last like 3-4 months now. I don't like iOS. I really don't. I'm using it out of like privacy and security reasons that are like specific to me, not to most people. But if I wasn't in that situation, I'd probably opt for like stock Android or Calyx because those are my two favorite ROMs that I really liked using. Either way, all I'll say is I'm with you. I much prefer being on Android overall. The other thing too is I'm gonna say something on my end that might be unpopular. If you're on Linux, you're signing yourself up for a more difficult time with really anything you're going to do. And I know the Linux community wants to fight back on that like all day, every day, but I think a lot of things are just more difficult on Linux. You're gonna have less client, you're gonna have less software compatibility with things. Not everything's like that, but a lot of things are. And this is one of those areas. I would really recommend something like a NAS, and that's why I think Linux is kind of like a slippery slope, because now you're on Linux, and now it's like, well, I might as well just use Nextcloud or like a NAS or something else that I also own and control, and before you know it, it's like a full-time job to have stuff like this. It's not always like that, but just saying.
Today I'm going to share 3 of the world's most anonymous operating systems for people needing the highest degrees of protection. Tails OS is a Linux distribution which runs as a live operating system, meaning it's never installed on your computer, but rather on removable storage, like a flash drive, which you boot into from any system. Now, I really like live operating systems, not even necessarily from a privacy and security perspective, but just from a usability perspective. For example, I can carry a flash drive that has Ventoy OS, and this can hold like 5 different live OSs, or however many I want, and then the other one can run Tails OS. And so anywhere I'm in public, on any computer, I can boot into an operating system of my choice, which is really cool just from a pure usability perspective. So I really like live operating systems aside from their design use case of testing Linux.
And I also have a very, very minimal digital lifestyle. I don't do much with tech. And if it wasn't for Techlore, I probably wouldn't even have a computer, which is what I said earlier. So like, I just don't do much with my tech. Like photos are the only thing that like I really need to worry about storing and doing something with them. That's really it.
By default, Tails OS is non-persistent, so any installations, files, settings, or other changes you make are automatically wiped when you shut down, where the flash drive returns to factory defaults. What really separates Tails is its integration with countless anonymity tools and configurations to make you blend in with everyone else using it. Everything from software updates to your web traffic is routed through the Tor network. Your device's unique MAC address is spoofed by default. It includes a tool that strips metadata from any file, as well as countless other tools you can dig into. Now, the anonymity of Tails OS is pretty unique. So traditionally, when you use the Tor browser, you are anonymous within that session, and you're pretty much getting 2 layers of protection. Everything you're doing is routed through the Tor network, which a lot of people seem to understand. But the other very important piece is that every Tor browser user is meant to look the same. so it looks like it's the same person who's accessing the Tor network. The Tor browser is then effectively a tool that accomplishes two things. It's designed to make people look the same, and then it routes you through the Tor anonymity network. Tails OS is special because it extends that protection onto an operating system basis. Just to summarize that, if you run like a normal operating system, like Windows, Fedora, or whatever you want, through Tor, you kind of get half of Tor's protection. In a way, you're missing out on the blending in with everyone else aspect of Tor, which might be fine for certain threat models, but Tails OS does kind of both things, where it blends you in and it routes you through Tor. All these attributes make Tails OS one of the best choices for users needing the highest degree of anonymity, all in a package that fits in your pocket. Next is Whonix, an OS with the goal of anonymity and security, but originally with an emphasis on being a virtual machine. A virtual machine is an operating system that runs virtually on top of your normal operating system in real time. Virtual machines are awesome, and they're actually, again, kind of like live operating systems, a staple just for my usability. I can have different virtual machines for different workflows and different purposes, for different threat models. If there's something that needs a little bit more security, I can make sure I have my downloads and things that are a little bit riskier done inside a virtual machine. I can have a virtual machine designed for a pseudonym. I can have a virtual machine for really anything I want. So it's cool to have Whonix run as one of these, because then it's just one more virtual machine in an already extensive sandbox that you have available to you. This is nice, as it reserves anonymity only for when you need it on your normal system, not all the time. While this is their most popular offering, Whonix recently introduced a live version similar to Tails, so we have a little competition here. If you're wondering how Whonix compares to Tails, especially the live versions, ultimately, it's complicated and really depends on your needs. But despite this comparison coming from Whonix, it's pretty darn objective and honest about each OS, so we encourage using this chart to compare Whonix to Tails after the video is done to see which is better for you. Now, a few honorable mentions, but mainly a quick note before I cover the last and final operating system. I want to mention that most people who watch this likely don't need to be using these powerful operating systems 24/7, and most of you can probably just get away with using them just for specific use cases that need their safety. And I don't really believe in black and white privacy. I think that there are specific situations where you need more privacy and more security, and some situations where you don't, and it's fine to make that compromise when you can. If you can't make that compromise, then yeah, don't make the compromise. But again, this is why it's a pretty individual journey, and I try to stay away from the black and white mentality I often see in the privacy world. As an extension of that, I want to mention and call out just using the Tor browser on your standard operating system already offers a huge layer of protection within that operating system, especially if you're keeping everything you're doing inside the browser. And so your honorable mentions do ultimately come down to things like Fedora, OpenSUSE, Arch, and most other Linux distributions that allow you to use this incredible Tor browser in a fairly safe and privacy-respecting environment that should fit most people's threat models more than enough. Now, the final operating system is unique for a big reason. It's designed to be used as a daily operating system. Qubes is based on Zen and Fedora with the goal of security by virtualizing pretty much everything as its own compartment. Out of the box, Qubes doesn't inherently offer greater degrees of anonymity, compared to your typical OS at least, but that quickly changes when you begin looking at the VM options within Qubes, including an option for Tor VM, and yes, a Whonix one as well. So if you liked Whonix, but want Whonix to run on top of a much more secure and trusted operating system, Qubes is the way to go, as it combines all the positives of Whonix, but on top of a more secure OS. The cool thing is, while Cubes is a bit clunky to use, it's not super unrealistic for technical folks to use it as a main OS day to day. It allows you to easily keep things like Unix safely reserved for when you actually need the anonymity, and it gives you the option to use normal things day to day that don't need the anonymity. And a quick note on Cubes, aside from it being seen as a privacy and security tool, similar to virtual machines, this compartmentalization is actually a really cool use case and usability tool. So you can have like whole businesses run on just one VM in Cubes, or you can have video production. I wouldn't recommend producing videos in Cubes. I think that's insane, but like as an example, you can have like straight up workflows in your life only done in a single part of Cubes, and Cubes is, from a usability perspective, allows you to do that very cleanly. Nate, who I co-host on Surveillance Support, is a big shill of Cubes and uses it for a ton of things, and he says for usability.
All right, what's the question?
I'm recording something. What do you like about Cubes? Why do you use it?
Okay. I enjoy the isolation. I enjoy that it makes it really easy to keep track of multiple accounts, like multiple Signal accounts, multiple Matrix accounts. I don't have to use different Matrix clients. I can use the same client over and over. And I like that it makes it basically impossible to send the wrong thing to the wrong person. You can't really copy and paste, a link that wasn't meant for a different identity or something like that. I like the fact that I can compartmentalize and reduce the risk of any sort of crossover or possible infection. I can spin up temporary VMs with one click to open links and attachments. I think those are kind of my big points.
So it sounds a lot like a usability thing almost. Like, yes, it extends into security and privacy, but you almost like the usability of it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, Cubes is actually like super overkill. For my threat model, I probably don't need it, but for me, it really gives me a lot of peace of mind and really improves my workflow.
With that said, like most tools, you have to use them properly. If you want to learn more about how to use these tools and how they fit into your privacy and security journey, check out our Become Anonymous guide right here. It's incredibly thorough and covers many of the projects that we talked about today. Let's talk about your computer's operating system. We already talked about Mac OS beating out Windows in almost every regard. Linux, though, has the ability to make things a step further. The ability. Many security researchers actually criticize Linux for not implementing quite as strong security as something like Mac OS. But this is very nitty-gritty, and the debate is ongoing. Where Linux wins hands down is offering a universally more private option, as it's open source and the community can view everything happening within the OS. Here is the hierarchy of what OS to choose based on privacy security. Oversimplified. Windows is on the bottom as the most privacy invading, followed by Mac OS. Generic Linux distros like Linux Mint, Fedora, Debian, etc. Then come the more specific operating systems like Tails OS, Unix, and Cubes. Tails OS and Unix are built mostly for anonymity by utilizing Tor, whereas Cubes is built for security and delegates anonymity to the Unix virtual machine. There is no right answer on what OS to pick. Each has pros and cons, including Windows, so it really comes down to you understanding why you're on an operating system and being aware of its limitations.
That's the neat thing. You don't.